I spent 10 years or so at Cisco, where I did a number of different things. Started off around the talent acquisition space, looking at data there, both internal data and external market intelligence data. And then my scope kind of broadened and broadened to be more around the HR analytics, people analytics space, technology, workforce planning, some of those areas. And now what I'm doing is working with David at Insight222, and primarily what I'm doing there is running our My HR Future platform, which I encourage you to check out, but also running initiatives that I'm about to talk to you all about, which are what we do with our members at Insight222 is we run these co-creation projects. So we try to understand what some of the biggest issues are that people are facing, and then we'll work with the group, use some design thinking practices to try and come up with a solution, excuse me, that's about 80% there or so, that people can then take back into their organizations and then kind of finish off and personalize for their companies. And so that's some of the work that I'll be talking to you about, and then obviously we'll have an opportunity to kind of discuss and share some of what you're all doing on this topic as well. Okay, so why did we start to think about this? Why do we think that ethics and trust is a big issue? Well, luckily, we've already heard it come up a few times today already, which is always nice, and there'll be more conversation about it as we go through the day. But we ran a survey back in 2017, so nearly 2 years ago, David. We need to do another one, clearly. And we asked this question around, are projects jeopardized by ethics and privacy concerns? So the things that you're doing, the work that you're doing around people analytics, are you seeing issues around this? And the answer was resoundingly yes, right? Often or sometimes, 81% of the time, we're seeing work that we're trying to do in the people analytics space get impacted by an ethics concern. Maybe it's the legal department, maybe we have an issue around how are employees going to react to that, whatever it might be. We're seeing projects either at their inception getting jeopardized, or sometimes when a whole lot of work has been done, we can't actually then deploy that project, that work, we can't share it because suddenly everyone gets concerned about it. So I'd love to just see a show of hands in the room for all of you as well. Kind of, is this something that's coming up with the work that you're doing when it comes to analytics? How often does the topic of ethics, how you can use data, trust, those types of things, how often are they coming up in conversations? A fair amount of hands. And actually, maybe a better question first of all, how many of you in the room are actively in the people analytics department or doing people analytics work? Okay, most. All right, that's a good grounding before I then have to change tack completely. So, we're seeing this coming out. We're seeing this arising more and more as a topic. Obviously, GDPR last year only really scratches the surface around how you manage data and you think about data privacy. There is still a lot you can do with data and being very compliant with GDPR. And the question that we all started to kind of talk about as part of this work was less about can we do it, because actually you can do a lot with the data that you have access to, but should we be doing it, right? And how do we actually govern that? How do we make those decisions? Okay, so this was the first one. And then the second question we asked was, do you have a governance body for approving or sponsoring people analytics projects? And again, you can see most of the time people said, no, we don't even have a forum for discussing this or having a conversation on this. So again, question to the room, how many of you have some form of governance body whereby you have a mechanism in place to discuss about whether you should be doing a certain type of people analytics project? A few. Okay, maybe like just over a third, something like that. Okay, good. So we'll get into that as well in a minute. So we talked about all of this. We talked about why this was a top issue. And then as a group, we worked a lot on what is the real problem that we're trying to solve here? Why do we care about ethics? Why do we care about trust? There was a lot of talk around we need to build an ethics charter. We need to build an ethics charter. Well, first of all, what is an ethics charter? And we'll get to that as to what we ended up saying was an ethics charter. But why? Why do we need that? And so the problem statement that we came up with was, how might we build trust that our work will benefit and not harm our employees, but still keep business value and impact? And I think there's two main areas there. The one that's highlighted, which is building trust. And that's super important, right? As we go beyond just basic reporting and dashboarding and all of the kind of way that we've kind of looked at HR analytics in the past, and we think more about this new world of all of these different data sets like Al talked about this morning that we can now start to tap into, how do we make sure that people are comfortable with us accessing that data and we build trust? But how do we not lose sight of the whole reason that we're doing all of this, or should be doing all of this anyway, which is business value and impact, right? Everything that we're doing around our people analytics projects should always be tying back to how we're helping the business. But if we focus too much on that, we potentially lose sight of the employees and the building trust, right? So this was the balance that we want to strike with this work, and that was the problem statement we set out to solve. And so how do we go about doing this? So as I said, we run these co-creation projects. Some are shorter, some are longer. This one kind of ran for about 6 months or so. And you can see that we started off by surveying our members. It crossed both our US membership and our European membership, ran various different workshops, virtual sessions, in-person sessions, all the way through to then create this ethics charter and toolkit that I'll give you a kind of high-level view of. And so we went through multiple sprints and iterations to really make sure that whilst we can't build something that's absolutely perfect for everyone, we built something that, you know, hopefully everyone could take away and start to work with. Now, the first problem that we tried to solve, or the first thing that we wanted to be very clear on once we had that problem statement very clearly set out, was, well, who is this for? Who are our stakeholders? And it's actually very difficult when you've got a room full of people analytics professionals to make sure that you're not just focusing on, well, I want to get my project out the door. I want to make sure my people analytics work is successful, right? Is that the only reason we're doing this? Well, of course not. And so we started to kind of go through who are the stakeholders. And you can see we started off with a nice flip chart. Well, it's the employees, it's the HR business partners. And before you know it, this list got insanely long. And you can see it's pretty much everyone. And my favorite on there, all people society, right? So we're not trying to solve, too much here, slightly boiling the ocean. But the point of where this went is that before you know it, it really is all everyone and everything, right? Once you really think about the impact of the work that you're doing, when you think back to the world of Cambridge Analytica information breaking, you think back to the types of news stories that hit the New York Times where people data has got into the wrong hands or whatever it might be, you realize that the type of work that we all do has a far-reaching impact, right? Way beyond just, looking at a predictive attrition model to benefit HR or a manager, but actually this impacts shareholders, this impacts, stock price, it impacts everything, right? And so I think it's really important to actually, take that in, that our stakeholders, when we think about the work that we do, are very far-reaching, and we need to be mindful of all of them when we do this. So, this is the bit where you have to do some work, I'm afraid. What we're going to do is what I want you to do in your tables, and for those of you that have joined a little bit late, I'm afraid I'm going to have to make you move, God, that's annoying, and come all the way forward and fill out these tables for me here, please, because we can't have a nice interactive discussion when you're sat back there. So you can come forward in a second when I finish teeing this up. But what I'd like you to do in your tables is spend about 10 minutes on question 1 there, and then probably about 5-10 minutes on question number 2 or so. We've got about 20 minutes or so to kind of work through this, and then I would like us to have a conversation afterwards to kind of share your perspectives as well. But when we think about these stakeholder groups, and obviously that list was incredibly long, so I've kind of chunked them into these 6 groups that you have here. So HR in general, right, excluding people analytics, the HR community, people analytics, your manager and leaders, right, across your organization. Then employees, candidates, contingent workers, right, workers, whether they're full-time, part-time, candidate, whatever it might be. The kind of rest of the organization that you might bump into, right, IT, business strategy, finance is in there too, ops, legal, that kind of group. And then you have the external stakeholders, as we talked about, shareholders, customers, things like that. When you think about these 6 groups, the first question I'd like you to discuss, and take some notes as you do, either all of you or nominate someone to take notes as we go through, what are the positives of you having the right ethical considerations in place when you think about these different stakeholders? Why, beyond just that business problem, why should we care about ethics and trust? What are some of the positives? And then it might be easier to start with this one if you prefer as a group. I'll let you guys decide that. But what are the negatives, right? What happens when you don't? And do you have experiences of what happens when you don't have some kind of ethical framework in place for how to navigate through the types of projects that you should be doing and how you think about this? So what are the negatives of not having an ethics charter or some kind of framework in place? And then does this differ at all when you think about the different stakeholders? So when you think about yourselves as people analytics professionals, obviously there's huge benefits to you maybe of having this type of framework there where you know that the projects can get signed off and it frees you up to get work done. But do those positives extend to the broader HR community, to managers? How might they see things differently, right? So try to kind of look through the eyes of your different stakeholders as you do this, and I'd love to kind of discuss that as well. Okay, so in your tables, take some time to get to know each other, introduce yourselves, and then you've got about 20 minutes or so to cover these two questions. What are the positives? What are the negatives? We'll take a little bit of time to come back and share, and then I'll walk you through the rest of the content. So let's come back together. So hopefully you had some good conversations around that. Who'd like to share just some of the themes that you discussed around these kind of positives and negatives of having some form of ethics governance in place?
I'm reading someone else's handwriting, so bear with me for a second. So on the positive side, we started talking about, we started actually talking with managers and leaders actually in terms of the impact of having a positive ethical consideration helps them represent the use of data to their people and I suppose helps sell it in, I suppose, to the business from an employee point of view. Should put employees' minds at ease, so we're very clear about how we're actually using their data and treating it in an ethical way. Promotes creativity and empowerment. You're going to have to help me on that one. I can't remember what that was about.
Yeah, the idea was, if you have an ethical code in place, people are more likely to engage with these types of insights. And then as a result, the company can be more, they can adapt or adopt them and ultimately be more innovative because you'll have more alignment across your organization. You'll be able to actually use them and be more creative because you all have a baseline understanding of how the data is being used. So that can also help with recruiting and your company brand in the end.
Yeah, excellent. So we're seeing kind of that trust building in employees, helping adoption, helping people feel comfortable, which then in turn should have a snowball effect, right, in terms of freeing up then the next project and the next project, and likewise managers and leaders then becoming more comfortable. Yeah, great feedback. Anyone else want to kind of add on that, maybe on some of the, obviously there's inherent negatives to those points if we don't do things, but other topics that others discussed?
So we talked about, for the analyst, that you've got more confidence on when you can say no. It's easier to push back. You've got something to back it up. So more efficient use of your time.
Yeah.
So it's not being wasted on creating information for someone that you then realise you can't give them. And consistency, because people will know when the answer's no, you can't have that, and they won't then try a workaround to go to someone else to get it. And everybody will be consistent on what information can be passed around and who can have that information. So it's not like if they go to someone else, they might get a different answer.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I think as a people analytics function, one of the hardest things is sometimes a manager coming to you or a senior stakeholder coming to you, I've got this great idea, I need this data, I want to do this thing, I want to do this project, and saying no and having a way to say no and to push back, because it is the right thing to do, but that it's not just, well, because I'm saying. So having clear guidelines that then can be supported by everyone, so you have that consistency, is something that absolutely came up in our conversations, and I think is a real benefit, yeah.
So another advantage, we talked quite a lot about who's involved in the process. Which kinds of groups we have to speak to get approvals for projects. And it sounds like most of us have other groups that we interact with, but not always the same groups. For my colleague here at Lego, she has a good relationship with the legal department. We have others working quite closely with works councils, but not all working with the same groups, all in the same way. For us at GSK, we have a very complex landscape, as I know you know, but we speak with legal, we speak with privacy, we speak with risk, we speak with procurement, and there's probably other groups I haven't even discovered yet. So having an ethics charter helps us to speed up that process. It helps us, if we can socialise that and actually co-create internally with some of those groups, when we go through that process of knowing whether or not to engage with a project, if we can do that ethical assessment up front, then it helps us to speed through that landscape of approvals. People already know we've done a certain amount of rigorous analysis on it.
Yeah, excellent, great point. Awesome, okay, I'm gonna put you out your misery now and keep talking and move through the slides. So I think those are all great points, right? And we can see that there are a number of huge benefits, right, for all stakeholders that come out of having this in place. Like obviously freeing up the work that you can do, helping you work with groups like works councils, legal, etc. But then how that then impacts employees, managers, the rest of the organization in how you manage and communicate data, right, I think is huge advantages across all of those areas. So let's take a little look at kind of where we landed with this. And so there's a bit of a build going on here. So let me go back one. So what we started to say was there are clearly kind of reference materials that are needed here. And some can be kind of generic, and some are going to be specific to the organization. So I'll talk a bit about what we came up with the ethics charter, and there was a pure data protection, data and privacy kind of checklist, which is really a good health for GDPR type thing, very tactical checklist to go through that ticks the boxes there. And then you're gonna have examples that you have internally that are data policy, usage guidelines, things like that are specific to an organization. And so we weren't trying to recreate the wheel with those. They're gonna be different. And so we didn't kind of go down that road. But what we did encourage was that people started to create this archive of prior decisions as well. And that was maybe a document that people didn't already have, or a guideline or whatever that people didn't already have that they should now create, whereby when you go through this process, you do document it so you can go back and say, yeah, we actually had a situation like this before, and this is what happened, and this is where we went, especially as you think about continuity between team members moving and things like that. And so really I'll build all this out actually. What we started to think about was your typical project lifecycle. So when you get a request coming in and someone wants you to go away and do some work, then that's the intake conversation, right? There's a typical kind of process you go through to understand what it is they're trying to do. And then there's a book that one of our colleagues wrote, Jonathan Farrar, called The Power of People. And in that, he has an 8-step process to running a people analytics project. And I highly recommend you to check that out, because it's a pretty good 8-step process. But the first 2 are around kind of building the hypothesis and thinking about the problem. The middle 4 are kind of doing the work. And then the last 2 are about driving action, getting results, and implementing. And what we didn't want to do was take all 8 steps and kind of have these gates at each stage. And so we started off with the 8, and we actually got smaller and smaller and smaller until we had these 3 steps here, where we said, well, really, there's some stuff that you need to figure out and some questions you need to ask at that intake stage. And there you can have a very clear go, no-go kind of decision to the point we had from this table, right? How do I say no to the manager if it's just a crazy request? How do I have a framework in place to do that? But actually, those questions should be really lightweight. They really, and I'll talk about them a bit in a minute, they really should be quite easy to tick off. And then we have this bit in the middle, which feels bad to just have it as 1 step because it's a ton of work, right? But really, that's where all the work happens. And once you've passed those basic questions up front, as a people analytics team, you should then be free to go away and do the work and to get on with it and to explore the hypothesis. But it doesn't mean you're going to share that data with anyone, right? You keep it locked down. You make sure the right people are seeing. You make sure you're aggregating, making it anonymous where needed, all of those things that you should do as good hygiene anyway. But you can do all of that work. And then there's this big gate that you then hit, which is, do we do anything with it? Like, have we answered the hypothesis? What are the questions we then need to think about as to who we can share this with, how broadly we can share it, and does it go anywhere from here? And so that's how we tried to break it down, and you can see there's kind of a rescope kind of loop in there. And so for each of these 3 steps, we came up with a little checklist. And I'm not going to go deep into all of the questions. I'm just going to give you a kind of high level on this. So this is an example of then what the deliverable is that all our members have taken away. And the first one here you can see, as I said, for the intake piece, we've kept it really lightweight. So is doing this work legally compliant? It's kind of important, right? Is it legal? Let's just get that one out of the way. If it's no, yeah, let's stop. Does this work comply with our ethics charter? So one of the other deliverables you saw on the previous page was this idea of this ethics charter. And what we did with that is we created this kind of mission statement, and we have values and principles in there. And again, it's a starting point that many of our members have taken back to their companies. And it's something that ideally you would put online, you'd put on your intranet, and you would say, these are the 10 principles that we abide by when we are going to work with your data. We're not going to do anything that we wouldn't be willing to share publicly, for example. We're not going to do whatever it might be. And so we came up with suggestions. People have taken that and kind of run with it. But basically, if you've got that document online that everyone can see, does it comply with that ethics charter? You have it in black and white. People can look at that. And then the third one I love, right? Would you be happy for the press to run a story on this? Would you be happy if this got leaked? If it was in the papers, whichever country you're in. If the answer is no, you probably shouldn't do it, right? And so we tried to keep it super simple at this point around, does it pass the following tests? And then you'll see what we also talked about for each of those stages is who needs to be involved. And so again, right up front, we tried to keep it really lightweight. We trust the people analytics team to be able to govern whether it passes those 3 tests. And maybe you need to bring in a data privacy officer or legal or an IT stakeholder or something like that. But actually, if you've got your ethics charter, if it's public, you've got this, and you become conversant with doing this, then really the people analytics team can govern it at this stage. However, when you then get into doing the work and do I socialize it more broadly, you can see the number of stakeholders starts to expand, right? At what point do we need to form a data governance council and have representatives from other groups who are going to decide whether this should go any further? At what point do we maybe have an employee consultation body, or we put this in front of the workers' councils, right? So the further as you go down the process, the broader it gets in terms of your socialization. But the idea being that up front, this doesn't get in the way of you just getting on with the work as long as it passes those 3 tests. Okay, so before I then spend about 10 minutes on the skill stuff, any kind of questions on that? Any kind of reactions to that based on the conversations you've just had? Just for a minute or 2 before we move on.
I'm just curious whether you've had any feedback from organisations where this is actually now being used and executed in terms of benefits to the process or wider.
Yeah, so Mark, I know you've got some of the way in kind of talking about this. I don't know if you want to share, and then I know I can answer that on some of the other feedback I've had as well.
It's quite difficult to get moving with it. I think to start off with, everybody displays an interest. But getting people to agree on what are the correct criteria across all of those different groups that I mentioned before can be a challenge. It really depends on the personalities involved to some extent, and I would say it probably also depends on the organisational culture. If you have a particularly risk-averse culture, then that can be introducing a certain amount of challenge. Within GSK, being pharma, quite a regulated industry, we do have a very risk-averse culture. But what I've noticed is that through cross-pollination of people moving around organisations, for me, for example, coming from more of a management consulting and technical background, that's starting to change. I think our legal teams and our risk teams are starting to become more pragmatic, starting to try and be supportive, whereas before I think it was very easy to hide behind, statute says no. Now I think there is a bit more room for creativity in terms of interpretation. And even GDPR, I think GDPR has been kind of heralded as one of those gates that's come down, but I think what that's done is set a minimum standard, and most organisations that I've spoken to actually were already fairly compliant with most elements of that, so it's actually enabled more innovation around that, where there wasn't that kind of availability before. So I think timing is a difficult one, but it's worth persevering with, because when you get to that point, then it does make the process a lot more easy.
Yeah, and we'd love to hear your reflections, David, from Anamika. But before that, one, I think, speaking to the membership as a whole, what's been very clear is some people have taken it and done stuff with it. Some have not found the right timing, like maybe they've tried or they've wanted to, and it just, it's just not the right time. I think GDPR has opened up the conversation for a lot of people, and actually has made people realize that it's not sufficient to actually cover all this stuff. So then it's kind of opened that conversation that there's something that's needed. The other insight from one member that I had was that having something from an external kind of co-created environment was hugely beneficial, rather than if they'd tried to do it themselves, which would have been very hard to say, oh yeah, well, this is what we think, and well, why should we believe what you think? Whereas kind of bringing something in, many organizations were involved. Oh, okay, well, that's kind of gets more of a gold stamp. Whether it should or not is up for grabs, right? But that kind of external perspective has helped push it through for him. Yeah, and Anamika's kind of view.
Who was in Anamika's presentation earlier from Rabobank? There's probably a few of you. So she actually talked how they'd taken this ethics charter that had been co-created, really used the values in it, the FAIR values, which I don't think you went through.
No, I talked about, but didn't go in detail.
Used that as the crux and then actually built the ethics charter around that. So he basically took this and then Rabobanked it. So made it more relevant for Rabobank, because if you co-create something, it's not going to be 100% of the way there, and then you just take it and implement it within your organisation. But as she was saying, how it really helped speed that process up. And she didn't mention about the external validation, but I've heard that from others as well.
And it's hard work, right? I think, not everyone's willing to have the conversation yet around it. I think having examples where you can start to apply it as well, where, maybe there is a risky kind of request around, oh, should we take this data that we have here and use it for this purpose over here? One of the questions in this second one around execution is, for what purpose did we gather that data, and are we staying true to that in this analysis, right? And that's a great example. Some of the American members talked about how they have benefits data, right? They know huge amounts on people's health, right? And imagine if you started to apply that to attrition or, whatever. And so it's like, but that's not the reason you collected that data, And so having something like that triggers the discussion, I think, is a way to kind of get into it. But it's heavy lifting, right? Good. All right, so we've got about 10 minutes left, so I'm just going to whiz through this. So, we've talked about, and I think this ties on really nicely, actually. I think we've talked about the need for ethics and trust and the rise in people analytics, but there's a much kind of broader skill set that we're starting to kind of deal with here, which is the cultural shift that's needed to make an organization more data-driven, particularly an HR organization as well. And so what we wanted to kind of think about at My HR Future, and David alluded to this earlier, was we wanted to say, well, what are the general skills that people feel are now needed to support everything that we're seeing around the future of work, the rise in HR technology, some of the different things we've seen around employee experience, user-centered design, et cetera. And so we ran a survey, as David mentioned, you can get the full report at that URL there. And it was a short survey, and we just asked people, what are the types of skills that they're focusing on or would like to learn, really. And we found that it fell into these 6 boxes, which I've kind of grouped into 3 pillars. So the first has people analytics and workforce planning in it. I also kind of talk about this. Everyone loves the term workforce planning, or in HR they do anyway. It's the one people are most comfortable with. But actually, I see this evolving more to agile org design. How do we truly just shift at a rapid rate around getting the talent in the right place, right? And what we call that in the future, who knows? But for now, we're still kind of running with this term. But it's really data-driven insights, right, that are focused on value, and how we kind of build that more kind of agile moving organization. as opposed to agile design. And then in the second pillar, it's very much technology and how we implement technology, right? So how do we understand what all those vendors downstairs do and all the other 1,000 that aren't downstairs? How do we understand which ones we should be implementing and when? How do we know what AI works? Is AI working? How does that all fit in? But actually, the design thinking piece here is super important because we can't just roll these tools out now, right? We talked about, are people comfortable with all of the different tools that they're using day to day? And I would say there's a real risk now with all of these different apps we're plugging into the cloud systems, which is that people do just kind of switch off and they don't engage, right? There's a reason people use Facebook, Instagram, whatever every day. It's because they want to. They see a value in it, right? And so by taking more of a design thinking approach, you start to put the user at the center and really focus more on why people should use technology and make sure you deploy technology to support what people need, right? Rather than just things that HR want to throw over the fence. And then this is really important, this third pillar, which is those 4 are kind of more technical skills. None of that will work unless we figure out how to get better at stakeholder management, at consulting, and at influencing. And I think that comes back to what Mark was talking about with the ethics charter, right? We're not going to be able to implement the ethics charter unless we figure out how to manage all those stakeholders, unless we get good at influencing, persuading, and all of these different skills. And so I see these all kind of tying together, right? We won't get technology deep into the organization unless we figure those out as well. And so these were the 6 skills that kind of bubbled up. Here you can see we asked a number of, for them to rate a number of different skills. We did free text as well, which I'll show you in a minute as well. There were other skills that were kind of strongly agree, 80%, like employer branding, but they weren't kind of as high. So generally, a lot of these skills people were feeling were important. We just kind of started to try and bubble it down to the kind of 6. And then this was the result of the free text analysis, and you can see here, people analytics by far and away came out on the top when we clustered these. Everyone always says, but hold on, what's other? I should probably learn that. And the point that's kind of important to note on this is within other, there are like 100 other things. Spanish came up, for example, and so we're not doing much with that one, but I highly recommend it. I studied at university. But also some people said none, which I find astounding, that they don't want to learn anything, so good luck to them. But yeah, so the other was just literally everything else you can think of, and it was 1s and 2s, and then there was very clear clustering in these on the left-hand side. And so coming back to that book I mentioned earlier, when we think about then within that bucket of people analytics, what are the skills that we need as people analytics professionals? Not surprisingly, we have data science in there. Obviously, the technical data science analytics capability is super important. We've seen in HR, the IO psychology type skills for quite some time. It comes, it goes. It's kind of having a resurgence at the moment. That's super important too. Some HR context is obviously very important. It can be learned. You don't have to hire for it, but is obviously very important as well. But then it's these 3 on the top, and in the book it talks about these being particularly relevant for people analytics leaders, but actually I would say also more broadly important for HR business partners and the HR community. When you're thinking about how you get traction with your people analytics projects, how you get results with data and get dashboards out and get insights out and ultimately drive results and action, well, it's with those communication skills, both within your team that are going to be super important, but also how do we teach the rest of HR to interpret that data and to tell a story and to have a great conversation with a manager about what the information is telling them around their attrition or their talent market situation or whatever it might be, right? So the storytelling and communications piece, the consulting piece, and ultimately obviously understanding the business that you support is super critical as well. And I think this is where we're going to see a much broader focus as time goes by as well. So that's pretty much me. I think there's about a minute left. If there are any other questions. The other thing just to highlight is do check out myhrfuture.com. Loads of great blog articles on there, YouTube videos. We have training as well. if you haven't met David Green yet, then say hello. But he has a newsletter that comes out every week, and we're just kicking off a podcast series as well. So you can find all of that by going to that subscribe link. Please do check it out. It's all free and available. And that's me. Any other questions before we close?
Any questions for Ian at all? Yeah, you see, you got lightly again because if it's for lunch,
it's break.
Just for the break.
Timed it beautifully.
Ian, thank you very much.
Thank you.